How to sell consulting services, that's what we're talking about on the podcast today. Let's get started.
'Cause damn, I was built to last. You move slow and I move fast, and that's facts. Only I can make a change. Slowly take a step today. I will never be the same, 'cause that's what it takes.
Welcome to your Consulting Business Podcast. My name's Russell Pearson. This is episode number 12, and today we're going to be talking about sales. How we can actually have people saying yes at the other end of a conversation, and ideally how we work in sales when it comes to a consulting practice. So whether you've got a business, whether you've got a practice, whether you've got an agency, whatever it is that you've got in the consulting space, whether you're a consultant who actually works for multinationals, corporate, government, defense, all sorts of different organizations, or SMEs, small to medium businesses or enterprises. It could be working with individuals, any sort of consulting in that space. So whether you're a consultant, an advisor, basically someone who sells expertise and helps someone have a transformation of some sort. They're going from one place to get to another place. That can be strategic, or it can be very, very specific into the steps that you have unique knowledge around. But how are we going to sell those things? How do we go about the process of selling things? Well, when I started back in the day, we talked about referral marketing, and it was all very much about how do I get more referrals? And interestingly, the conversation has become, for many people, how do I go about getting referrals instead of how do I go about getting clients? And the referral step in itself has all sorts of landmines that can blow up in our face and actually prevent us from not just getting the sale, but prevent us from actually getting the type of clients and the type of projects that we want to work on. So the process of how to sell consulting services is the focus of today. So let's get started. So how have things changed? Well, interestingly enough, I've been working in advisory spaces, marketing promotional spaces. Obviously, I consult on marketing and sales. But I've been working in those spaces for 26 years now. And going back to the 90s, where I graduated in the work that I was doing, we were doing a lot of design thinking style consulting. It's interesting to see the transactional difference in how people sell. Because back in the 90s, it was very much around the solution. Are you the solution provider for the thing? And if you didn't have the solution, then you were no one. And it was really weird. It was this whole yuppie thing. And it's like, we're the solution providers for ABC. And it was strange in that it was so focused on the thing that you were selling rather than the client. It was so focused on the thing that you were selling rather than the outcome of the thing you were selling that it had to change. And after the bubble burst, the technology bubble burst going into the 2000s, it's interesting how it did change. There was a lot of marketing that turned to spin marketing. A lot of people were like leaning into branding, but branding in a space that was like sell the sizzle, not the steak. This concept of selling, which for me doesn't make any sense, right? You can't sell the sizzle without the steak. Well, you can, but it actually makes things harder. It's so much easier to sell the steak and the sizzle together. And so once we got into sort of 2010s, it was very much about features and benefits, because for a good part of time in there, when it came to the selling the sizzle, it was just about the benefit. And so, sell the good night's sleep rather than the pillow, sell all those different things. But you really needed to sell both. And it's kind of like, here's what I've got, here's what it'll do for you. That's the benefit. Here's how it does it is the feature, right? And that model, is one I learned from Frank Kern, very, very smart individual. That model has become more useful over time, but there is a better way. And there is a better way of selling now than there was. And there is an easier way of doing sales now than there was. And it really fits neatly into the world of a consultant, because it enables you to not become the sleazy salesperson to make a sale, but in actual fact enables you to go beyond the trusted advisor and come in at a very, very high point of respect by using the sales process. Like the sales process can actually elevate you in your standing, your respect, your authority with the client just because of the process. So now it's not just about features and benefits, it's about outcomes. So the features and benefits give me what as an outcome? What is the outcome that we're trying to get to? And so understanding that people are at a place and they want to get to an outcome is the transitional step. It's the gap that we're looking to help people with. We're helping support them with it and helping them make that transformation, that transition. Interestingly, it's in that transition itself where the value is. And so how you get from here to there is far less important than actually getting from here to there, which is why it's no longer about the solution, the vehicle, the thing that was in between the problem and the outcome, but how do we actually get there? Well, people don't really care. You know, the vehicle could be a car, it could be a helicopter, it could be a plane. I don't really mind as long as it gets me here in a way that I'm happy with, right? So that's the outcome focus really is now where we're working with sales. But how do you develop the outcome? How do you decide the outcome? Well, the great thing about selling in this space now is that you don't have to. You don't have to be going out and spending tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, developing a product or a product suite of things that you can bring to the table for the client. All you need to do these days is understand the market that you're talking to, be very clear about the problems that they have, be very clear about the outcomes they want, and pick a handful of those that you are very good at helping with. You're very good at solving. You're very good at helping them make those transformations. So in the process of doing that, the process now with sales is a done with you type scenario. We don't do sales to people. There was a time when we probably did do sales to people, and we would convince people, and we would, in some cases, use sort of heavy-handed objection handling, heavy-handed, scarcity tactics, buy now tactics, things that really didn't serve the relationship long term. And now, which is great, we have the opportunity to actually sit with the client and design with them. And so I'm just going to give you a very, very simple process that you can start to use in the buying, engaging a client to the buying cycle. All right. So there are steps that we lead to before we get to the sales process itself, and making sure that you have a pipeline, you have a process that brings people from absolute strangers into your world, qualifies that they are right to be engaging with them over time. You know, invites them to a step, has a small conversation to see if now is the right time. And if it is, we get into a buying discussion. Now, the process before, and I've done just about every type of sales process there is. There's these 20-point processes, we're reducing the resistance and then increasing the pressure. And there's all these different models that people use. But over time, I've started to develop some of my own. And I think that they are simpler to use and yet at the same time effective because we know what part of the buying conversation we are in. So the one I tend to use is my own, and I call it collaborative sales. And it has 4 main ingredients, 4 steps, if you will. Getting into a conversation when you would have these 3 steps really is getting into a conversation where the person understands that you're having an intentional conversation about getting to a specific outcome. They're there to work with you. This is not a case where, can I contact you and make an offer? This is not that situation. You've got into this situation because someone has expressed a challenge that they've got. They have, you can see a gap that you know that you can help with, and there's a priority to do something about it now. If those things don't exist, there's no point in getting to a conversation with someone. So the first step, though, when you do get into these conversations is make friends. Now, people talk about rapport. They talk about all these different ways to get in rapport, but I think shortcut that. There's no reason to be making it so logical and technical. It is so much easier to make friends. Interestingly, friends tell friends secrets, which is really what you need at the end of that buy-in process so that they will tell you what's really going on. And as a consultant, you need that form of trust. So just make friends. It's so much easier. Like, engage with this person, understand this person, come and be friendly, and engage this person with your curiosity and your conversation, and have them feel comfortable about opening up, making friends. Right. So we're not going to get into too much detail, because if you've ever made a friend before, you know how. Right. If you haven't made friends before, go and make some friends, and then you can get better at sales. Right. So you know that you've made at least a likability friendship. You've made a small friendship because people are willing to tell you about what's really going on. Okay, so you've made friends. That's step one. Step two, curiosity. It's discovery. Now, discovery is a word a lot of people use, but what is discovery? Well, it's about being curious. You're there to go, all right, well, tell me what's happening. Tell me what's going on. Understanding that this second point of time, certainly not the first, certainly not the second, is about making suggestions. It's not about making suggestions. It's about listening to people. And so you're listening. You're being curious. You, without sounding robotic, you ask a question. If you get a response, acknowledge the response. Don't just keep going in for more and more questions, because you start to turn it into an interrogation. It's a curious conversation. You're really interested to understand what's going on in their world. And through the process of that, you'll start to hear the challenges. You'll start to hear the outcomes that they want. You'll start to hear the things that they've tried, ideally because you've asked the question, by the way, what have you tried to solve that? The things that they've tried, what have they done in the past, where they've spent money before, what are the issues that they're having with getting to the outcome they want, who's involved in the process, who's been good, who's been a challenge, who's who's getting in the way. You got to get, and this period of the entire conversation is probably the largest, because it's a way of like diagnosing to a degree what's really going on. There are so many techniques that you can use. There's mapping the conversation using NLP and consulting language and coaching language, the meta models. There's so many different ways that you can do that, but I'm not going to get into that, because really all you need to do is be curious. You're curious, you're interested to understand what's going on, and then they'll say something and you'll go, wow, that's interesting. It's interesting that you said put it that way. Let me ask you another question, and you go in and ask more questions. But ideally, at the end of this process, you should be very, very clear that this is the problem they're having. This is where they want to go. This is the outcome they want. And this is the thing that's getting in the way. All right. So you understand that process. Now, in the old days, we would move from there into a proposal, into a presentation, or go into solution mode. But we don't do that anymore. What we do is we move into collaboration. You're now talking with this person who's got a very, very clear, much clearer than you have, view of where they are in their business. They can clearly see what's going on and the things that are potentially going to get in the way. And so collaborating with this inside person, right, who is the person that you ideally want to work with, collaborating with them to go, all right, so it seems like this is the outcome that you want to get to. Yes, that is, or maybe no, it's not. Well, tell me more about that. You get clarity on that outcome. You get clarity on the problem where they're at. So, typically you start bringing some things to the table, some toys to play with. Typically, we find that people who are having these challenges and want these outcomes will start looking at maybe these three areas. Okay, have you tried anything like that in your business? Well, we tried one of those, it didn't work. Tell me more about why it didn't work. And you get into this design process. So you're collaborating with this person to design the how. You're designing what are the steps that you're going to take to get to the outcome. Now, what's cool about that is, number one, you've got an inside person. They know a little bit more about the business. You've got an outside perspective, so you can certainly use that. It's very effective to not be stuck in the problem. So you're looking at it from two different lenses. But actually designing it with them means you create something that they want, right? Which sounds crazy, but it is so much easier to say yes to something that you designed yourself than something that someone was designed for you and you didn't have a hand in. So the collaborative process, not only does it make it easier for you to get to something that's going to be more effective, but it also gets a far higher likelihood of yes, because they were engaged in the process. They were involved in designing it. So you collaborate. All right, well, it seems like these are the three steps that we would actually take to actually get the outcome. Does that sound right to you? Yes, it does. Okay, excellent. would you like support with that? Would you like to talk about how we can help? That's where we move on to the next steps, which is help say yes. And the help say yes is, again, you haven't made an offer at any point here. You haven't set a price necessarily. You could have set a price in the collaboration. They might have said, oh, how much is this? Well, we've only got this much budget. All right, let's design around that. And that's a useful step, because if you get to a budget limitation in the help say yes point, you can go back into collaboration and actually redesign. That's always a step that you can take. But the help say yes point is understanding, who am I selling to? So if it's a corporation, multinational, which is a corporation anyway, government or other, there will be a process for getting a yes, not just this one person saying yes. So maybe you have to get on a panel. Maybe you need to go through from the panel to a purchase order. There's little steps that are involved. So simply asking the question, so how would you go about buying this, can be a large part of the process in understanding how you're going to get that final yes and get the cash in the door. With a decision-making person on the call, so someone who has the final authority, then it could be very much a simple case of explaining, well, these are the steps that we need to take from here. What we need to do is book in a time, and we need to sign an agreement, and we need a deposit. Now, you may not have even talked about the price at this point. It's absolutely fine, because they will ask at some point, what's the price? Because you'll be taking a card at some point. Now, you ideally have pre-qualified them before you even get onto this call. You've understood what they've done in the past. You'll understand their world a little bit because of the programs they've done, consulting they've had in the past, the outcomes they're trying to get, or what their experience has been. Where they've spent money. The sort of money they've spent. Now, if you don't have that, that doesn't mean that they're the wrong person, because if the value of the outcome you're creating is big enough, people will say yes. People say yes to any amount of money, as long as it's possible. So we don't want to push people where it's not possible. Ideally, we want to work with people who we can really, really help, can easily afford us, and we really enjoy working with, right? But ideally, they need to have a priority. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why people say no. Often it's because now is not a priority, or this thing that we're talking about is not a priority. Now, if you didn't check previously before you even got on this conversation whether this was a priority to solve, then, woe is you. That's a step to do beforehand. But now you're here, it's a priority. They've said it's a priority. You've talked about the overview of what you're looking to do. Ideally, you even haven't told them how. They just told you how they would like it to go, how would they like the process to go. And if that makes sense, then you can move ahead. But the help say yes is, these are the steps we need to take. And the help say yes is, in some form, handling objections. But the objections don't need to be heavy. They don't need to be onerous. Well, how much is it? Oh, here's the price. Would you like to move ahead? Or what would you like to do? There's so many questions you can ask there that are not going to close the deal, just that you want to hand it back to them. You want to give them the opportunity to take the next steps. Oh, it's a bit pricey. It's a bit pricey. Often we'll move to a step where it's like, all right, well, getting the value is not necessarily going to be cheap. That's fine. I don't say that, but that's the mindset. Let's put price to the side for a second. If it was something that you could easily afford right now, would you say yes? And if they say yes, then just go back to the price and see how you can handle that. Now, I'm not saying drop your price. I'm never saying drop your price, but you can re-collaborate in the design of the outcome so that it's less effort or less work for a smaller outcome. You can also look at payment terms. You can break that up into 100 different ways. You can look at some form of funding that they can get. You can look at some form of sponsorship. There are so many different opportunities for you to engage with people on that finance side of things. But let's say for a second that they were not clear. They said, well, actually, we've put price to the side and gone, all right, so if you could easily afford it right now, would you be going ahead? And they go, well, actually, I need to speak to my partner. All right, well, then, ideally you want to get that partner on the call because they're a decision maker. The part of the help say yes may be a 15-minute conversation with that person as well. But I would check it. So I'd go, all right, well, if your partner says yes, are we a goer? They go, oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, what I've seen happen a lot is like the price is an issue. I go, all right, I'll put price to the side. We step in one step further. And, time. I think this is going to take a long time. Okay. We haven't even talked about time. Well, what if I was to tell you it was, only going to be an hour a week or whatever it might be? And they go, oh, I didn't realize it was that short a time. And what would you like to do? Oh, let's go ahead. Suddenly price is not an issue anymore. Let's go back to the time piece. So if time wasn't an issue, would you go ahead? Well, actually, this is other reason. You want to nail down the specific reason, and you keep going down, you cascade down until you find the specific reason, and then you handle it. And handling means, ideally, before you even get on any of these calls, you've thought about what are the possible objections, what are the things we can do without dropping your price. I want to make that very clear. Most of these opportunities are going to allow you to actually have higher price deals, not lower price deals. So it's rarely price that's ever an issue. Put price to the side. Yes, there's ways that we can finance this thing. There's ways to manage it. But think about time. Who else needs to be on the call? Is there things preventing them from moving forward? Are there ways of doing this in bite-sized chunks rather than doing it all as one big project? There are so many different things that they may bring up, but you need to know your audience, which is all about understanding. All right? So help say yes. And ideally, if that objection is handled, then it's like, what would you like to do? Well, let's go ahead. All right. And then you move through your process. What are the steps that they need to take? Now, don't make those onerous. A lot of people go, I got a contract. I got the big contract signed. Contract is not worth as much as you think it is worth. And there is always wiggle room in almost every contract. So contracts are useful for us to agree to something and to have a process around with when there is disagreements or when things change. But understanding that it is rare, if ever, to find a contract that is completely binding that people are willing to say yes to, right? So understand that as part of the buying process is how do you manage risk for them as much as risk for yourself, all right? You got to make sure that you look after yourself first, but then you're looking after your client as well, and you're making it easy to buy. So what are the 4 steps? Well, the first step is make friends. The second step is be curious. The third step is collaboration. The fourth step is help say yes. And if you do those processes in order, if you're aware of what you're up to in those processes, then actually getting consulting sales, especially with decision makers who can say yes, are far more easy. Now, if you've got government sales, if you've got sales into things like defense, if you've got there is always process in a lot of these big organizational sales. So understanding the process before you come in is going to be a really valuable step. Understanding what you can't do in the process. So for instance, with some of these defense or government contracts, you can't be talking to the decision makers beforehand. So understand those rules. But the whole premise here is understand your market. Who are the people that you're going to be speaking to? Understand what is their buying process, and then understand how your buying process can actually control, pace, and lead the conversation from there. You'll notice that I didn't say send a proposal. And I would suggest at every opportunity to avoid sending a proposal where you can, because a proposal is a lonely conversation that goes without you because you're not there to manage or collaborate. Collaborative sales is about doing it with the client, not actually doing it on your own and then sending a written document. So I'll talk about more of that on another podcast, but there's your process. Make friends, get curious, collaboration, and finally help say yes. And if you do those things, I can see you having many, many sales with great relationships. And what's cool about the entire process is if you can't get to a collaborative outcome that they want to buy, you do not have to make the offer. You don't have to give them a price. You don't have to give them any of that stuff, which is fantastic because once you've given them the price and given them the offer, it's a yes, no, maybe situation. Maybe is the worst, by the way. But when they're in that situation, if they say no, it's unlikely they're going to be coming back in a short period of time because they've done that experience already. But if you haven't given the offer, if you haven't given it to them, they may well come back because you just didn't get to a specific deal to make an offer on. So hopefully that makes sense as well. Now, for anyone who wants more resources, more episodes like this, you can go to Your Consulting Business Podcast. In fact, it's called consultingbusinesspodcast.com. Always get it wrong. I think that's becoming a thing that I do now. But also, I would love you to subscribe. So whether you're on YouTube, subscribe there. Whether you are on your favorite podcasting platform, I'd love you to subscribe there. I'd love to hear reviews too. If there's anything that you can either put in the comments as a review or actually on the podcasting platforms, put a review in. I would love to know what you think. I'd love to hear from you all. You can find me online. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. Obviously, there's a website, russellpearson.com, SSL, the way Russell should be spelt. Until next time, let me know if you've got any questions. Stay passionate, and I will catch you on the next episode. Bye for now. Thank you for joining us on Your Consulting Business Podcast. Make sure to click the subscribe button for future updates, and also make sure to go to consultingbusinesspodcast.com for goodies made especially for you by yours truly. I will see you on the site.